Proposition 19 would make several changes to the way that property taxes are applied to properties that have just gone through a property transaction. Under California's current rules for taxing property, most of the time when a property changes hands, its property tax bill increases. This means that the new owner of a property typically ends up paying a higher property tax bill than the prior owner. And it also means that if a current homeowner moves, they end up paying a higher property tax bill for their new home than their old home. Past voter measures have created two key exceptions to this rule. The first is for homeowners who are over 55 or severely disabled, or whose property has been impacted by a natural disaster or contamination. These homeowners can move to a new home of equal or lesser value within the same county and keep their current property tax bill. They can also move to a limited number of other counties where local elected officials have voted to participate in this program. The second exception is for properties that are transferred between parents and children, or grandparents and grandchildren if the grandchild's parents are deceased. This exception applies without limitation to a parent or grandparent's primary home, as well as a limited amount of property use for other purposes such as rental property or businesses. Proposition 19 would make changes to both of the exceptions that I just mentioned. First, Prop 19 would broaden in a few ways the exception for homeowners who are over 55, severely disabled, or who have been impacted by a natural disaster. First, it would allow eligible homeowners to move to a home that is more expensive than their current home while maintaining a somewhat lower tax bill. Second, it would allow moves to any county in the state instead of the limited number of ones that have voted to participate under current law. And finally, it would increase the number of times a homeowner can make use of this exception from once in a lifetime to 3 times. Conversely, Prop 19 would narrow the exception for inherited properties. Specifically, it limits the exception to include only inherited properties that will be used by the child as a primary residence or a farm. The measure also places a limit on the amount of tax savings that can be received for higher value inherited properties. The two main components of Prop 19 would have offsetting effects on property tax collections for local governments. Narrowing the inheritance rules would increase property tax revenues, while broadening the exception for eligible homeowners would decrease property tax revenues. But overall, we think property taxes would increase. In the first few years after the measure, we think cities, counties, and special districts could gain tens of millions of dollars per year. And over time, we think these revenue gains could grow to a few $100 million per year. We also think schools could receive similar property tax gains to those of cities, counties, and special districts. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Okay, so this one was put on the ballot by the state legislature, passed it in June. The Democratic Party is in favor, and the Libertarian Peace and Freedom parties are opposed. The Republican Party did not take a position on this one. We have endorsements by business organizations, labor organizations, the governor, the state treasurer, and controller. And then the opposition is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the League of Women Voters, the Friends Committee on Legislation, among others. And then the newspaper that's pretty lopsided, just the San Diego Union Tribune in favor and many others against. And the expenditures, we have realtors on the yes side, so they must feel like they will sell more properties. The Democratic Party put some money in and some individuals. And then on the other side, we have the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And then again, this is super lopsided with the money on the in favor of its side. All right, so the questions on Prop 19. How do you define severely disabled?
I'm sorry, I don't have the precise definition in front of me. It's there is one defined, there's an existing definition in statute that was actually created by prior voter measures. I don't have the specific definition in front of me.
Does some of this money go to firefighters or firefighting?
There is a provision that could potentially provide additional funding to firefighters. I guess kind of the short of it is that there's a bit of a complicated interaction between this measure and California's school financing laws. That interaction means that I mentioned earlier that we think this measure could result in additional property taxes going to schools. Maybe that's a few $100 million a year down the line. The interaction with school finance laws means we think in most years those property taxes mean just additional funding to schools. But there is a possibility that in some years those rules will dictate that that money in effect will instead result in funding being placed in a statewide fund that would go to provide funding to CAL FIRE as well as local fire districts.
Can you explain why the the income from taxes to the state would go up with this measure? Because part of it sounds like it would be the other direction.
Yeah, so there's a potential, one of the things that's taxed as income are capital gains that you earn on the sale of a property. And there is the potential, because this measure would, in effect, it would reduce some disincentives for certain people to sell properties, that there could be an increase in property transactions. Some of those transactions might result in people taking gains that could be taxed as income.
Okay. And is there any specific information about how long the home would need to be used as a primary residence by the child who inherited it?
No, so those sorts of specifics aren't detailed in the measure. I think the kind of controlling rule is that there has to be what's called a homeowner's exemption being claimed on the property, which is only supposed to be claimed if the owner of the property is living there. There isn't anything in the language of the measure that specifies any details beyond that about how that would be implemented or checked. Those sorts of details with a lot of measures are usually left up to statutes passed by the legislature after the fact, or various rulemaking bodies like the Board of Equalization or county assessors.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next measure. Thank you.